We are now going to start sewing the piping onto the garment. So first of all, we're starting on the, what would be on the table here, the right hand side, although when it goes on it becomes the left, but on the table it's the right side of it. And you want to start sewing the piping on the way that you can see it here. You can see the double piping on the other side. You want to leave a bit of an edge, just a few millimetres, just so you see a bit of the fabric poking below. And I've just started to tack it on there in some pink thread. But what I need to do first is, in line with that point, I want to make a little dot about there, which you can just about see. So that lines up with the point there. This is important because you'll be sewing to there, and then in a minute after that you're going to be cutting up to that dot. So I'm just going to finish tacking it all the way to the dot so it holds that in place for me, and so I can take the pin out. Okay, right, I've now tacked all the way down to the dot, and now I'm going to cut at a 90-degree angle, actually cut through the fabric to the dot, and don't cut through the stitching line. I've lost count how many times over the years that we say that, do not cut through the stitching line, okay? You will not be happy. Okay, so I've done that. Basically that just then allows you to bend and turn the piping a lot more easier. Okay, so next what we're going to do, you can see I've got my tacking thread here. I'm going to bend that round. Again, you want to keep this edge just so you see a little bit of your fabric from the bodice peeking through. And you want to make sure this is, according to the tutorial I found, he says it's better if you have it standing up and not flattening it down. So try and keep it stood up like 3D. And then I'm just going to tack down that other side, trying to keep up these two things in place with the bit of fabric and keep that standing up. So just running a couple of tacking stitches, do a couple at the point now where it's now weaker because I've cut it. Just start coming up. So basically that's how to do your point. I'll be doing that later on as well when you reach the front part of the bodice, except it won't be such a short piece I'm doing. There'll be a lot more distance before I actually get to that point. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue tacking this in place so that it's ready to sew. Of course, the other important point to remember is when you get to your seams, make sure they're open and flat. So you don't want them all going off to the side like that. You want to make sure that they're open. Okay, so I've now been tacking all the way along and I'm reaching this point again, and I've done exactly the same thing. I've made a little dot there. I'm then just going to finish tacking off to that dot to hold that down to the fabric underneath. I will do exactly the same again, and I will clip at an angle just there. Okay, so I've done exactly the same again, and I've clipped to that point so that I can turn it the other way round. And I'll carry on tacking all the way around the bottom and carry on tacking this right to the other end. Okay, now sewn, tacked on all my piping. The next thing I want to do is sew it, and I'll go back to using this zipper foot, which will make it easier and flatter and I can get as close as possible to the piping.
Right.
Okay, so I'm now sewing along the piping, trying to get as close as possible to that line, but without actually going through the piping. And what I'm going to do is just running off the end here. Like so, and then I'm going to actually take it out and cut that, so I've run straight off there. Now what I'm going to do, okay, I was having a bit of trouble with that, so Mum's going to take over and just do the corner for me. So we just turned it round and we're just doing the other side. And what you want to do every now and then is just check it, just turn it over and check it that you're getting as close as possible. Okay, we're now sewn on the piping, and you can see at the points here we've got some excess, so we're just going to cut that excess fabric off. Like so. And now when you turn it over, you won't have so much excess on the inside to actually try and pull in and catch stitch down.
Now that the piping's been sewn on, we don't want to have any extra bulk, so what I'm going to do is take out the cord up as far as the bodice. So I'm going to take that bit out, and there's a way of doing that so that it makes it easy to do it. Go back along your cording and then use a pin and go through the cords just to secure them so they don't move. Now back to the end of the cord here, I'm going to put a mark on where the cord comes out of my piping, like that. And then I'm going to take a measurement from there to where I want to cut my piping. So I'm going to measure that, and it's 9 centimetres. So then, with the cord secured here, I can now pull these pieces of piping out. And I'm going to measure back from my mark 9 centimetres, and then I'm going to cut it. That's about 2 there. Oh, sorry. Fell out of my hands. There we go, 9 centimetres. And then cut the cord and do the same with the other one. You've got your mark and line that up with 0, and then measure 9 centimetres, which is there. Just cut the cord, and now when you pull your piping, all that cord has been pulled out, and now you've got some flat bias. Then you can take your pin out. Okay, now we're not sure whether we're doing this the right way, because we just cannot find anywhere on the internet where it shows us how to turn this particular part of the piping without having some extra over. We've tried all ways to come to a conclusion. So what we're going to try and do is, now that you've got your piping sewn on, we're going to pull this excess fabric back on itself really tight at a slight angle. Just secure that with a pin. So before we go any further now, we're just going to secure this down with a few whipping stitches so it doesn't come off just down this edge here, maybe a couple of centimetres.
Thank you.
We've now secured that down with a few whip stitches there. So what we're going to do now is get the rest of the pink out of the way. So what we thought that we would do is, when the whole of the piping is turned over like that, what we can now do is whip stitch this excess pink to the top with some really good tight stitches, so that it should look like that. Okay, now that we've sewn up the side here to pull these two pieces together really tight so it's closed up. And what I would like to do is, if I have a look at the piping on this side, what will happen here is that we're going to tuck the piping behind, and then the piping finishes in a straight line with the edge of the bodice, and that's what I'd like to do over here. So what we're going to do is turn it at an angle so that the piping comes down and in a straight line here, and then what we will do is just fold that piping up out of the way. So the first part of the operation is to turn the piping, and then we'll just put a pin in there to hold it, and then going on the back we'll just do a few stitches down here to hold it. That will be the next step. Okay, now that we've secured that in place, we need to get rid of this excess bit of piping. What we're going to do is just turn it under to the back so you can't see it. So turn it over to the wrong side, and we're just going to put a few stitches along the edge just to hold it in place.
So I've now catched it extra to the inside with some whipping stitches on the edge, and then this is what it should look like from the outside. We're now going to move on to doing the other edge.
Okay, this one's a bit simpler to do on this side, and from the back you can see that we've cut the corner of the fabric and cut the bias as well, get rid of the excess. So what we're going to do is turn onto the piping for the end bit. If I just turn it to the back, you can see what it's going to look like. So we're just going to put a few stitches down here and a few stitches along here just to hold it in place. Okay, now that we've neatened that down, we're now going to turn this back so it's hiding behind the front there, and we're just going to sew that down, but we don't need all this, so I'm going to cut it down a little bit, get rid of some of the length, that's it, and then we're just going to turn it over inside the bodice and step in. If the pins work. Okay, now we're just going to catch stitch that into position at the back. So when it's finished, it should look like that.
Okay, so this is it all tacked down on the back there, and what it looks like the front at this point. And now we move on to the next part.
Okay, before we progress to actually turning the piping over, if we look to the inside here, we've got some fabric that is sticking out behind the piping, so we can actually cut this off out of the way, being careful not to cut your piping at the same time. So I'm just going to move the piping out of the way here.
We're now going to start actually catch stitching the edge of this piping down to the inside of the bodice so it lies lovely and flat on the outside. So I'm just going to pull that down a little bit in my bum. Get some thread and a needle, and again the usual whip stitching, catch stitching, whatever you want to call it. I did quite a few at the start just to really hold it down, make it nice and strong. It's no good just doing one or two little stitches. Okay, so then we're back to doing the same method again that I've used a lot of times. Catch a bit of the liner and a bit of the piping seam there, and you're just catching it to the liner so that it isn't loose like this and flopping all over the place. You really want to make sure it's tightish so it looks all nice and beautiful from the outside. I've now completed sewing and tacking down the excess to the inside there, and just turn it around to the outside and see what it looks like. I have to stress that was extremely difficult to do, but that's more or less what it should look like now. So that's the piping done, and we'll move on to the next bit. Next up, I'm going to use the same trim and diamante trim that I used on the skirt. So please refer to the skirt swag tutorial for this. I got some plain trim and some diamante chain, and I just glued on the amount I need with this E6000 glue. And I'm going to use this across the top of my bodice. Okay, so next I'm just pinning this trim on, and then at the back here you have to remember that you've got your opening. So I want to start here. These are the marks I made earlier for our hooks and bars that we're going to go on. So I've just tucked the underneath of the lace under, and this I can just glue on a little bit more if I need to. That's why I left a little bit hanging. So yeah, I've just sort of pinned this to the top, overlapping it just slightly, and then I will be hand sewing this all the way down to the other side, and then when I get to the other side that should overlap like so.
Now I'm going to show you the positioning of the hooks. I've already put some marks in to start off. One at the top, obviously, and one at the bottom. And the position they're going in, they're a bit fiddly, is hook side up, and they're going to be facing out. So I've already put 2 marks there. That's where the hole's going to be for my hook. And I want the hook to be just barely on the edge when you've sewn it on. Maybe just a little tiny bit of fabric showing, about 1 millimetre, but barely on the edge. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I've worked that out by dissecting the first one and the last one and going halfway. So that's where another hook is going to go. Then I've divided that again. I'll put a hook there and a hook there. Then for the top we don't need all the hooks. So I'm now going to mark where one will go in the middle there, one will go in the middle there, and I'm going to put 2 extra ones between these 2 marks and 2 extra ones between these 2 marks. So we'll sort out the top one first, and the spacing there is 8 centimetres between the 2. So I'm going to set this eye up and just turn the ruler around at 4 centimetres. So there's the mark for 4 centimetres, and my hook is going to go, excuse me, it's very, very slippy, in this position. Just move it forward a bit because I want it to be barely on the edge. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to... Okay, I'm holding it down barely on the edge, and I'm just going to put a pencil mark where the eyes are, so that when you come to sew them on you'll position it exactly right, and that's what the hook will look like, with about 1mm to spare from the edge. I'm going to divide this one up now so I can put one in the middle, which is 8 centimetres again, and the hook is going to go at 4 centimetres. Fiddly. I'm just going to hold that tight with my finger, and then just put a pencil mark through the eyes so that you can see where the eye is going to be sewn on, and it's just barely 1mm away from the edge. I'm going to now dissect this one into 2 and this one into 2.
This now completes the hooks. Okay, so now we've fitted the hooks down the side, we're going to do bars, which are not like the little metal eyes that come with the hooks and eyes. They're little bars that you make out of thread, and we'll show you that in a moment. But we're just doing a fitting so that we can actually line up the back and mark where these bars are going to go.
As you can see there, I've just run a piece of thread down there. This is just temporary, and I've lined up my hooks with the thread, and that's just holding it for while we have a fitting, and I'm quite happy where the bars are going to go.